Few characters can claim to have changed a universe as much as Toji Fushiguro did. I mean, every anime character can affect the world in some way, but those effects are often contained within a certain sphere of influence. Toji not only took everyone for a ride, but he literally shattered fate as it's supposed to work within the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. So let's go ahead and take a look at what he actually did and the effect he continues to have on the series to this day. I mean, the first point that we obviously have to get into is he basically redefined Gojo and Geto as characters. And somewhat for the better and somewhat for the worse. I mean, the most obvious of these is probably the effect he had on Satoru Gojo. Before meeting Toji Fushiguro, Gojo was considered one of the two strongest sorcerers at Jujutsu High, which put him at being one of the two strongest people in the whole world of Jujutsu Kaisen. But he wasn't necessarily the strongest at this point, and after encountering the superhuman, he pretty much had to reshape himself from the ground up, and that is where we got to see him turn into the strongest being in Jujutsu Kaisen. I mean, a lot of the powers and abilities that we take for granted, even in Season 1, didn't exist in the beginning of the Hidden Inventory arc, and basically, Fushiguro forced them to come into existence. He forced Gojo to have to learn how to make sure no one could ever hit him again. He had to learn how to use reverse curse technique. He had to do all of these different things because he needed to be the strongest. And that is a big effect, especially for this universe and the effect that Gojo would later have on it. But that's not the only thing he did to Gojo. In a very interesting twist, this whole arc, an arc really in many ways manipulated by Toji, forced Gojo to become a better person. I mean, there are some other things that played into this as well, especially with what happened to Geto, but you can't really deny that in this arc, the way that he manipulated Gojo and Geto brought them closer to Riko. And in turn, that started to make Gojo a better person. It's also pretty clear that him becoming the strongest and then later seeing what that power of being a strongest person did while being alone to Geto caused him to reevaluate everything about the JJK universe. It left a profound effect on him and basically created the character that we know today that saved both Yuta and Yuji, and more than likely has had a greater effect on everyone else's lives too. So, yeah, Toji pretty much was a significant figure in Gojo's life, but he wasn't the only person that he affected. There's also the fact that he is, in no small part, responsible for what Suguru Geto became. Now, I don't mean that he entirely turned him into a villain from this one section of his life. There were several other compounding factors that caused Geto to essentially crack under all of this pressure and negativity. But Toji definitely was a key turning point for that. It was really the point where Geto's idea of the strong and the weak started to flip, and it's also really where part of his hatred for regular humans comes from. And I think that we can see this best exemplified in JJK Zero. We see this because of the way that the two characters treat Maki. When we look at Gojo, we know that Gojo values her as a student. She is one of his 4 first-year students. And while we do know from later parts of the story that Maki did not bond to him the way that Yuta did, she didn't necessarily hate him. However, I hold the personal theory that it was more than likely Gojo that got Maki into Jujutsu Kaisen's primary school establishment in Tokyo Jujutsu High. Because, really think about this. In order to get into the school, the basic requirement is to be able to see cursed spirits. But she doesn't have that ability. And we know the Zenin had no interest in helping her become a sorcerer. While it is possible they might have let her in out of spite on the hopes that it would break her, kill her, or force her back, it's also just as possible that Gojo might have actually been one of the ones that helped secure her time in the school. And while we may never get this question answered, it would be genuinely interesting to see. We know that at the very least, he has no problem with her and views her as one of his students that he needs to help and protect. Now compare this to how Geto treated her the first time he ever met her. He remarks on the strength of Yuta, Toge, and Panda, but is utterly disgusted by Maki. And while that is entirely gross, it kind of makes sense because I think all he can see when he looks at Maki is Toji. And I think that might be one of the greatest examples of how that character affected both men. But affecting characters isn't the only thing he did. he literally affected the whole world in Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, what do I mean when I say the whole world? I mean every important aspect of Jujutsu was rocked when he killed Riko Amanai, because Tengen could not merge with the Star Plasma Vessel. This is a very important process. It basically secures the balance in the Jujutsu world. Tengen is responsible for strengthening barriers and giving the assistant supervisors and managers more power so that they can better help sorcerers. He's kind of the founding pillar of, the Jujutsu world as we understand it in the series, and him being weakened to any degree is a bad thing. Not to mention, while we don't see it, there was a strong possibility that Tengen could have actually become a full-blown eldritch monster from this event. And it still might be possible in the future, but the fact that he managed to just barely come up with a workaround to keep himself, or themselves as we would later find out, possibly contained, is a big deal. But it does sound like in the process of explaining that, it might have limited some of Tengen's abilities. We'll only know more probably in the future as Shinjuku Showdown winds down and we'll get more into the actual plan, but for the time being, we can assume that this left a massive effect. And we know that even from Tengen's own words that basically it should never have happened. But because Toji is not bound by cursed energy, he's not bound by fate in any way as we understand it. So, yeah, he kind of just shattered the whole world and then left. But on an interesting note, when he left, he also left an interesting avenue for them to continue forward from. Toji was one of the strongest beings on the planet, capable of actually coming up with a plan and then nearly killing Satoru Gojo and Sukru Geto. And to be blatantly honest, had this not been a prequel, there's a very good chance they could have ended up dead. So when we think about that, when we think about the fact that he's perhaps one of the three great beings in Jujutsu Kaisen, right up there with Gojo and Riemann Sukuna, and I say that Maki has his same power, that's a big deal. It might be a little rushed at this point because we don't know exactly how Jujutsu Kaisen will end, but it feels fair to say that with Maki having attained the level of power that she has, and from the fact it still continues to grow to some degree, even as we watch the series continue forward, she will probably be a significant aspect on how Jujutsu Kaisen will end, because much like Toji, she's probably not bound by fate at all. So it might be a key element in the future that not only is she a superhuman comparable to what is essentially one of the big three figures of the world as we understand it, but she's able to actually change destiny perhaps however she wants. So we'll only know in the future how far this will go, but I think we can look forward to seeing more of a monster, but maybe working for the good guys. You guys let me know how you think Toji affected the world, and I'll see you next time.